Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and recently Eric Dubay decided to release a documentary titled The Best Flat Earth Documentary. That's a really original name there, Eric. So why does Eric Dubay think that he's made the best Flat Earth documentary? Well, apart from narcissism, of course. It's because it's 6 hours long. You've heard that correctly. It's a 6-hour-long Eric Dubay video. Now, when it comes to this documentary, you'd think that Eric Dubay would show off his filmmaking talents, or maybe even hire James Truth. But no, it's literally just a 6-hour-long Eric Dubay video. That's all it is. Oh, and it's also in 4:3 aspect ratio, not 16:9 like most professional films are and like what a lot of Eric Dubay's videos are, but in 4:3. So really, it's just another Eric Dubay video to debunk. And you can bet your ass that I'm going to be debunking it starting with this video here. Although it will be in multiple parts because I cannot put up with 6 hours of Eric Dubay at once. That is torture. And I will also cut out bits where he repeats himself for everyone else's sake. So, let's get into it. Ahoy hoy, Nick from the future here, and I have recorded most of this video. And I must say that facepalm protection is a must. Do not proceed without it. Okay, back to the video.
Wolves in sheep's clothing have pulled the wool over our eyes. For almost 500 years, the masses have been thoroughly deceived by a cosmic fairy tale of astronomical proportions.
So, the first thing that I need to point out is Eric Dubay is being a little bit nebulous here, but we all know what he's talking about. We all know that he's saying that we've been deceived about the shape of the Earth, even though he's wrong because the Earth is a globe. So, working under this assumption, Eric Dubay thinks that everyone's been told that the Earth is a globe for only 500 years. But that's not true, is it? Humanity has known that the Earth is a globe for over 2,000 years. Typical florists getting history wrong.
We have been taught a falsehood so gigantic and diabolical that it has blinded us from our own experience and common sense, from seeing the world and the universe as they truly are.
I still want to know why flat earthers think that we've been lied to about the shape of the Earth for 2,500 years. I mean, what would it actually achieve?
David Wardlaw Scott said, "Children are taught in their geography books, when too young to apprehend aright the meaning of such things, that the world is a great globe revolving around the sun, and the story is repeated continuously year by year till they reach maturity, at which time they generally become so absorbed in other matters as to be indifferent as to whether the teaching be true or not."
You know, that sounds suspiciously similar to how a lot of kids are taught about the Bible. But that aside, when I was in school, I found that the globe wasn't taught as much as subjects like maths, reading, and writing. Funny that. But it was certainly foundational for certain parts of science, as well as certain parts of history. If you did not know the Earth was a globe when you were to learn about them, you would be very confused. Much like chemistry would be very confusing if you knew nothing about atoms.
And as they hear of nobody contradicting it, they presume that it must be the correct thing, if not to believe, at least to receive it as a fact. They thus tacitly give their assent to a theory which, if it had first been presented to them at what are called years of discretion, they would at once have rejected.
That's only if you assume that people lack the critical thinking skills to figure out the shape of the Earth for themselves. And when it comes to someone like Eric Dubay, it's easy to see why he'd think that, as he lacks the critical thinking skills to figure out the shape of the Earth for himself. You see, there are a lot of people that would figure out that the Earth is not spherical if the Earth were to not be spherical, because the shape of the Earth directly affects their work, like international pilots, for example. And as I said earlier, if you didn't tell kids that the Earth was a globe in school, then they would be very confused because they wouldn't have that foundation to build on.
The consequences of evil teaching, whether in religion or in science, are far more disastrous than is generally supposed, especially in a luxurious, laissez-faire age like our own.
I do actually wonder, is Eric Dubay religious? Because he seems like the type that would be, but you can never be too sure.
For 500 years, an elite cabal of sun worshippers has propagated this nihilistic, atheistic cosmology and cosmogony.
That sounds exactly like something a religious person would say. Now please do tell me why sun worshippers would be pushing an atheist agenda, and please do tell me how the Earth being a globe somehow destroys religion. Spoilers, religion has thrived no matter what people believe the shape of the Earth to be.
We have been taught, contrary to all common sense and experience, that the seemingly motionless, flat Earth beneath our feet is actually a massive, moving ball spinning through space at over 1,000 miles per hour.
So one thing that flat earthers never take into account here is when you are talking about how fast an object is spinning, you should talk about its tangential velocity rather than linear velocity. And the tangential velocity of Earth is 1.0027 rotations per day. Now, some people might say, don't you mean one rotation per day? And one rotation per day is a lot simpler, but I feel like Eric Dubay is enough of an idiot that being precise now will pay off later. Now, when it comes to one rotation per day, I would love to see any flat earther attempt to figure out the maths to see how that would affect things here on Earth, but none have done it. I wonder why.
Wobbling and tilted 23.5 degrees on its vertical axis, while orbiting the Sun at a blinding 67,000 miles per hour, in concert with the entire solar system, spiraling 500,000 miles per hour around the Milky Way, and careening across the expanding universe away from the Big Bang at an incredible 670 million miles per hour, but that you can feel and experience none of it.
Okay, flat earthers, repeat after me. We only feel acceleration, not velocity. Got it? If you're in a plane that's doing 900 kilometers per hour, it feels no different than if you're in a car doing 100 kilometers per hour.
We have been taught that a mysterious force called gravity, a magical magnetism responsible for keeping everything from falling or flying off the spinning ball Earth, is just strong enough to hold people, oceans, and the atmosphere tightly to the surface, but just weak enough to allow bugs, birds, and planes to take off with ease.
I feel like what Eric Dubay did there is he snuck in a bit of loaded language, and that loaded language was hold things tightly to the surface of the Earth. Like, once you are at the surface of the Earth, there is no way that you are leaving it because of gravity, when that's not the case. Gravity as a force, like any other force, can be overcome. You just need to put work in to overcome it. When I'm just sitting here, I'm not putting any work in to overcome the force of gravity, so therefore I'm not going to float away. But if I were to jump, then I'd put a bit of force in to temporarily overcome the force of gravity. Birds and bugs, on the other hand, put work in over a longer period of time to overcome the force of gravity for longer. However, they always eventually come back down to Earth. Because gravity. So I'm going to skip a fair bit of this next bit, just so that we get straight to the point rather than having to listen to an entire story. But for context, he told a story about what his teacher told him as a kid.
Had such been proposed to me afterwards as a man, I would have answered somewhat as follows. Sir, I beg to say that the illustration you have given of a man whirling a pail of water round his head, and the oceans revolving round the sun, does not in any degree confirm your argument, because the water in the two cases is placed under entirely different circumstances, but, to be of any value, the conditions in each case must be the same, which here they are not. The pail is a hollow vessel which holds the water inside it, whereas, according to your teaching, the earth is a ball, with a continuous curvature outside, which, in agreement with the laws of nature, could not retain any water.
So the likely reason why the teacher used the water in the pail example is to show that water doesn't always just go down. You see, as a child, a universal down does seem kind of intuitive, but as you grow up, you realize that there is no single direction that is down, provided that you're not a flat earther. It is also kind of hard to explain to a child that liquids will conform to the forces acting upon them because a child has no concept of what a force is. But provided that children actually go through with their education and complete basic physics, then they should figure this out for themselves.
We have been taught that the ball Earth spins at a constant velocity, perfectly dragging the atmosphere along so we cannot feel the slightest bit of motion, perturbation, wind, or air resistance. They say we cannot feel any of this motion because the magical Velcro of gravity pulls the atmosphere precisely along.
So the reason why the atmosphere moves along with the Earth is because of two reasons, and Eric Dubay pointed the first one out, and that is gravity. The second is friction. So does anybody know what causes friction? Well, friction is caused by surfaces not being completely smooth. When a surface is not completely smooth, it will cause things that are moving along it to slow down and then start moving in the same direction as the surface. Now in nature, there's no such thing as a completely smooth surface. Every surface has at least minor defects to it. So if anything were to collide with those defects, then it would be pushed in the same direction as those defects. Now when it comes to the surface of the Earth, there are rather large defects like cliffs and mountains. So when the atmosphere collides with cliffs and mountains, it starts traveling in the same direction as the surface of the Earth, or from the surface of the Earth's reference frame, it just slows the atmosphere down.
And we cannot measure any of this motion because the stars are so incredibly far away that over 100 million miles of supposed annual orbit around the Sun amounts to not a single inch of relative parallax change.
Well, Eric Dubay is just completely wrong here because parallax has been measured in stars. In fact, the parallax of Proxima Centauri is 0.769 arcseconds.
We have been taught that the apparent orbit of the Sun, planets, and stars, but not the Moon, around the Earth are all optical illusions, that it is, in fact, the Earth beneath our feet which moves, and our eyes that deceive us. Special exception is made for the Moon, however, which is said to revolve around the Earth just as it appears.
So, a minor nitpick here. The Moon doesn't actually revolve around the Earth as it appears, because otherwise it would orbit the Earth daily. Instead, it orbits the Earth in 28-day cycles.
Since we only ever see one side of the Moon, we have been taught this is because the Moon's supposed 10.3 mile per hour west to east rotation, combined with its 2,288 mile per hour orbit of Earth, just happens to be the exact motion and speed necessary to perfectly cancel out the Earth's supposed 1,000 mile per hour east to west rotation and 67,000 mile per hour orbit of the Sun, thereby creating the perpetual dark side of the Moon illusion.
Excuse me, the fuck did you just say?
What the fuck was that explanation? So the reason why we only see one side of the Moon is because the Moon is tidally locked with the Earth. Eric Dubay sounds like he doesn't actually understand what he's talking about. And in case anyone doesn't know, what tidally locked means is that gravity keeps one side of the Moon pointing at the Earth at all times because gravity is always acting on that side of the Moon more than the further side of the Moon.
Though the Sun and Moon appear to be relatively small, equal-sized bodies revolving around a stationary Earth, we have been taught that this too is an optical illusion, and they are in fact thousands of miles divergent in diameter.
Well, they aren't always the exact same angular size. For example, sometimes the Moon will appear slightly bigger, in which case it will be a supermoon, whereas sometimes it might be a little bit further away, so it will appear slightly smaller. So just because they're roughly the same angular size doesn't really prove anything. Well, apart from the fact that the Moon causes solar eclipses, but that's another argument for another time.
Lactantius, in his On the False Wisdom of the Philosophers, wrote, "A sphere where people on the other side live with their feet above their heads, where rain, snow, and hail fall upwards."
So just because some random person can't grasp the fact that on different places on Earth, down is a completely different direction than to other places on Earth, doesn't make the Earth flat.
David Wardlaw Scott wrote, "I confess that I cannot imagine how any human being, in his proper senses, can believe that the Sun is stationary when, with his own eyes, he sees it revolving around the heavens."
Again, personal incredulity doesn't prove anything. Maybe other people understand it much better than you do.
We have been taught that those tiny pinpricks of light in the night sky known as planets or wandering stars are actually physical, globular, Earth-like habitations millions of miles away.
Because they are. People struggled for a long time trying to predict when certain planets would appear. And eventually they decided, what if all the planets orbited the sun? Then they found that they could perfectly predict when each planet would appear. And once it was figured out that the planets were orbiting the sun and not the Earth, then Newton came up with his universal laws of gravitation.
We have been taught that the tiny pinpricks of light in the sky known as the fixed stars are actually distant suns trillions of miles away, each complete with their own solar systems, orbiting moons, and Earth-like planets which potentially harbor alien life.
So how that was discovered is a lot more complicated than what flat earthers will be able to understand, but I'll give a brief overview. Spectroscopy. So what spectroscopy does is it analyzes the wavelengths of light that we receive here on Earth from distant stars. Using that analysis, you can figure out what the stars are made of, and you can also do this on the sun. And you'll find that some stars are made of the exact same stuff as the sun. And from this, you can figure out that the sun is probably just another star. And believe me, it gets a lot more complicated when it comes to discovering planets around other star systems, so I'm not even going to bother trying to explain that.
We have been taught that the moon has no light of its own, but is merely a reflector of the sun's light.
This is fairly easy to figure out too, because when you point a camera at a ball and the moon during the day, then the light side will be pointing in the same direction. And I have done this for myself as I took the photo that was just up on screen.
That some Masons from NASA actually walked on the moon. That some other Masons from NASA sent rovers to Mars.
So yes, people have gone to the moon. If you do not believe that people have gone to the moon, then try to fake your own moon landings using nothing but technology that was available back in the 60s.
That satellites and space stations are incessantly spinning in suspended animation above the Earth.
Again, satellites exist. People have caught images of satellites moving across the sky. People have also caught images of the ISS moving across the sky. If you knew anything about how GPS actually works, you'd know that it only works because satellites exist.
That Hubble telescopes are taking snapshots of distant planets, galaxies, stars, quasars, black holes, wormholes, and other fantastic celestial phenomena.
Fun fact, you can actually take pictures of galaxies for yourself if you have the right equipment. I have seen a picture of a sombrero galaxy taken by someone who is an independent astrophotographer. This person has taken photos of various planets, done star trail photos, as well as photographed nebulae.
We have been taught that our ignorant ancient ancestors for millennia falsely believed the Earth to be the flat, immovable center of the universe. But thanks to modern science and its Masonic prophets like Copernicus, Newton, Galileo, Collins, Aldrin, and Armstrong, we now believe the world to be a giant whirling sea-Earth globe careening through infinite space.
We actually do not know who initially discovered that the Earth is a globe. Why? Because we've known it for thousands of years. And also, what is Eric Dubay's obsession with Masons? I hear a lot of people going, Masons are bad, but never actually giving any reason why. It's like they think that Masons are the Illuminati or something. In fact, that is probably exactly what they believe, but have no evidence for it. I also wonder how many of the people that they say are Masons were actually Masons, and how much they're just saying are Masons to fit their narrative.
We have been taught that science books like Newton's Principia Mathematica, which propound the spherical heliocentric myth, are the bearers of truth, while backwater religious books like the Bible, which propound a flat geocentric Earth, are merely outdated myths.
That is when you can look at the contents of that book and see what each book is saying and work out whether it matches with reality. In the case of Newton's book, it makes predictions which match with reality. In the case of the Bible, it has some pretty outlandish things like talking animals and people being raised from the dead. And if Newton's books had nonsense about people being raised from the dead or other stuff like that, then I'd have a problem with it. Much like I have a problem with Deepak Chopra's books. And also, I would love to see a flat earther have a debate with Kent Hovind about whether the Bible actually supports a flat earth. That would be fun to see.
We have been taught that the universe was unintelligently designed and randomly created in a cosmic coincidence of nothing inexplicably becoming everything.
So generally when I hear the claim that, oh, everything came from nothing, it's coming from people like Christians who are trying to strawman the Big Bang. Whereas generally what I actually hear from atheists and other proponents of the Big Bang is that everything has always existed, just in a different form or different state than what it is in today.
We have been taught that through millions upon millions of years of accidental evolution and happenstance, the Big Bang universe began manifesting suns, moons, planets, then water.
Oh no, he's conflating evolution with cosmic formation. Okay, so cosmic formation is something that is inevitable given the fundamental forces of the universe. Now you can attempt to argue that the values of the fundamental forces were just chance, but once you accept that they are the way they are, then the universe was bound to form in the way that we know it today.
Then somehow out of dead, inert elements, single-celled conscious organisms came to life.
No! That's not what happened! How are you getting this so goddamn wrong? Single-cell organisms are not conscious. Where the fuck did you get that idea from? A more apt description would be that DNA, or proteins, started replicating themselves, and eventually that formed into single-cell organisms.
Grew and multiplied and mutated into larger, different organisms, which continued to grow, multiply, and mutate, gaining diversity and complexity, and losing credibility, to the point where amphibians crawled up on land, replaced gills with lungs, started breathing air, maturated into mammals, became bipedal, grew opposable thumbs, evolved into monkeys. Then in one final fluke adaptation, a hybrid monkey man was made, and the rest is human history.
So there is a lot of evidence for evolution. You can look to the genetic code of humans. You can look to humans that have grown tails, or even gills. And one of my personal favourite evidences of evolution are ERVs.
I'm not prepared for that.
Yeah, we know that, Kent. You can also look at the fossil record and realise that there are a lot of fossils that link us and other primates with a common ancestor.
We have been taught that the height of stupidity and naivety was when our ignorant ancestors believed the earth to be flat.
I wouldn't argue that they were stupid. I'd just argue that they didn't have the information compiled of thousands of years of research that we have today.
And that if any man somehow still thinks the earth to be the immovable center of the universe, that they must be the most primitive kind of ignoramus.
Yes, because we have access to information that has been compiled over thousands of years, that has been checked time and time again and shown to be true. And flat earthers just go, nah, it's all fake, it's all CGI.
Nowadays, the label flat earther has become literally synonymous with moron, and is a common cliché derogatory term for insulting someone's intelligence.
Yes, because the only people that don't think that flat earthers are insane are flat earthers. I've met people who think that the reptilian Illuminati elite are about to establish the New World Order that think that flat earthers are just crazy.
B. Chasbro wrote, 99 people out of 100 would give the same answer to the interrogation, and that same answer would be to the effect that the earth is a globe which revolves around the sun. The 99 who makes this reply would do it because they know it to be the case. How do they know it? Let this question be put to them, and they will bestow upon you a withering smile of pity at what they conceive to be an imbecility of mind on your part, and answer you in something like the following style. It has always been so. We learnt it at school. Clever men say so. And look how astronomers can foretell eclipses, and then lose their temper at the very idea of the globular theory being incorrect.
Who actually says, well, smart men say so, therefore the earth is round? I have heard nobody say that in my life. The closest thing I've heard to anything like that is, well, neither you nor I have enough knowledge on the subject to actually have a proper conversation about it. And that is never in reference to the shape of the earth. And yes, there will be people that just won't give a shit if you ask them, well, how do you know the earth is round? Because they don't care. But for most people, they do have an adequate reason for why they believe the earth to be a sphere. And as for people who think the Earth is a globe losing their temper at the idea of the globe theory being incorrect, have you heard this guy?
This arrogant little millennial prick that you somehow think that's fucking Earth curve.
Yeah, I don't think Nathan Oakley quite got the memo on that one.
Now if the ears of these 99 could only be gained, they would be shown in an irresistible manner that the philosophy which would speak of a round and revolving world is a false philosophy.
Don't you just love it when flat earthers assume that people that don't believe the earth is flat have no valid reasons for thinking the earth is a globe? But anyway, I think I'll leave it here for today. Please do consider supporting me on Patreon, as it takes quite a bit of effort to make Eric Dubay's stupidity far more bearable than it normally would be. And I also cut out some of the parts where he just drones on. As always, a big shout out to my $20 or more patrons. What Jesus, Hugh Jarsz, M.C.Nutkin, Wolfie, and Morrie. I don't know how many more parts this is going to be. But either way, I'll see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for watching. Oh jeez, I've still got 5 hours and 45 minutes left of it. This is going to be a mission.